Hey guys, welcome to Motolap. I'm Tom, and today we're talking about something controversial, something interesting, and something a lot of riders don't realize until they walk into a showroom and hear the words, "We don't have it," or "It's discontinued," or "We can't get that model anymore." Because today we're breaking down 7 Japanese motorcycles that dealers just can't sell anymore. Not because they're bad bikes, not because riders didn't love them, but because of emissions regulations, changing market demand, pricing pressure, insurance issues, and shifting industry strategy. And this is important because Japanese motorcycles built their global reputation on performance, reliability, affordability, and innovation. But even giants like Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki have had to make tough decisions, and some legendary machines quietly disappeared from showroom floors. Number 1, the Suzuki GSXR600. This bike was once the king of the middleweight supersport class, a razor-sharp track weapon that dominated roads and race circuits for years. Lightweight, screaming high-rev inline-4 engine, aggressive styling, and that classic GSXR DNA. But here's the problem. The 600cc supersport market shrank dramatically. Insurance costs for younger riders skyrocketed. Emissions standards tightened, especially in Europe, which affected global production planning. And buyers started shifting toward naked bikes and adventure bikes instead of full-fairing race replicas. So, dealers in many markets simply stopped getting new GSXR 600 models. And while you may still find used ones everywhere, walking into a dealership expecting a brand new GSXR 600 often leads to disappointment, because Suzuki shifted focus toward larger displacement or more versatile models. And it's not that the GSXR 600 wasn't good, it's that the market moved on. Number 2, the Honda CBR 600RR in certain markets, another supersport legend. Sharp handling, bulletproof reliability, track-ready geometry, and a reputation for precision. But similar story. Tightening emissions regulations and declining demand in the midweight supersport segment forced Honda to reconsider where and how it sells this bike. In some regions, the CBR 600RR disappeared for years before limited reintroductions. And in other regions, dealers simply cannot stock it due to compliance or corporate distribution decisions. Because manufacturers now prioritize high-volume categories like adventure bikes, retro models, and entry-level commuters, and supersports no longer move units like they did in the early 2000s. Number 3, the Yamaha R6 in its street legal form. This one hit hard for many riders because the R6 wasn't just a motorcycle. It was an icon, screaming redline, razor chassis, and unmistakable styling. But Yamaha officially discontinued the street-legal R6 in many markets due to emissions compliance costs versus sales volume, choosing instead to offer a track-only R6 race version. Which means if you go into many dealerships today asking for a brand new street R6, they simply can't sell you one because it doesn't exist as a road-legal option anymore in those markets. And that decision reflects a broader industry trend where high-revving supersport engines struggle to meet modern emission standards without expensive redesigns, and manufacturers must balance engineering costs against projected sales. Number 4, the Kawasaki ZX-6R in certain restricted markets. Now, this one is tricky because the ZX-6R still exists in some regions, but in others, emissions regulations or import limitations temporarily removed it from dealer floors. And that inconsistency confuses riders because one country has it, another doesn't, and dealers can only sell what the distributor supplies. And if corporate headquarters decide not to homologate a model for a specific emissions tier, dealers simply don't get inventory. And the ZX-6R's high-revving inline-4 design faces the same regulatory pressure that hit other 600cc supersports, showing again that this entire category has been squeezed by modern standards and shifting consumer taste. Number 5, the Suzuki Hayabusa in certain earlier emissions transitions. Now before you say, but the Hayabusa is still around, yes, it returned with updates. But there were periods when dealers in certain markets couldn't sell new ones because the outgoing generation didn't meet updated emissions standards, and the new one wasn't yet available. And that gap left showrooms without one of Suzuki's most legendary nameplates. And it highlights how even flagship hyperbikes are not immune to regulatory timing and production shifts. because updating a high-performance engine to meet stricter emissions rules requires major investment, and sometimes manufacturers pause sales rather than rush a redesign. Number 6. The Honda CB1100 in many global markets, including parts of North America. This retro-styled air-cooled inline-4 was beloved by purists who wanted classic looks with modern reliability. But air-cooled engines struggle under tightening emissions requirements, and sales numbers weren't strong enough to justify a complete overhaul. So Honda gradually pulled the CB1100 from various markets, leaving dealers unable to order new units. And this one really shows how nostalgia alone cannot sustain a model if regulatory costs rise and buyer interest shifts toward more feature-packed or adventure-oriented machines. Number 7. The Yamaha V-Max, an absolute muscle bike legend with its massive V4 engine and unmistakable presence. But extreme performance machines with large displacement engines face increasing regulatory and economic pressure. Limited sales volume combined with emissions compliance costs ultimately led to its discontinuation in many regions, meaning dealers simply can't sell new V-Max models anymore. And that marks the end of an era for a bike that defined brute force Japanese engineering for decades. And when you look at all 7 of these motorcycles together, a pattern emerges. It's not that Japanese manufacturers forgot how to build exciting machines. It's that the global motorcycle industry is evolving. Emission standards like Euro regulations influence global production planning even outside Europe. Development budgets are being redirected toward electric models, hybrid technology, and high-volume segments like adventure bikes and naked street fighters. And consumer buying habits have shifted dramatically compared to the early 2000s sport bike boom. Riders today often want comfort, tech features, rider aids, upright ergonomics, and versatility. And that demand shapes what dealers can stock and sell, because dealerships depend on factory supply, and factory supply depends on profitability, compliance, and strategic direction. And here's the key takeaway. When you hear that dealers can't sell a certain Japanese motorcycle, it rarely means there's something wrong with the bike itself. It usually means the business case no longer works under modern conditions. And while that's disappointing for enthusiasts, it also opens the door to new categories, new designs, and new innovations. But there's also another layer to this. Dealer floor space is limited. Manufacturers analyze turnover rates, and slow-selling models tie up capital. So even if a motorcycle technically exists, dealers might hesitate to order it if demand is weak, especially in markets where insurance costs scare younger buyers away from supersports. And financing trends favor practical machines over pure performance bikes, and the rise of naked versions of former supersport platforms, like street fighters and sport nakeds, has absorbed much of the audience that once bought fully fared race replicas, because riders realized they could get similar performance with more comfort and lower insurance premiums. So when we talk about these 7 Japanese motorcycles, we're really talking about a broader shift in motorcycling culture, from peak horsepower bragging rights to balanced usability, from racetrack identity to everyday versatility. And that doesn't mean performance bikes are dead. It just means the ecosystem has changed. And maybe in the future, we'll see electrified supersports or compliant high-revving engines making a comeback. But for now, if you walk into many dealerships asking for a brand new GSXR600, R6 Street version, CB1100 V-Max, or certain Supersport trims, the answer may simply be no. Not because the dealer doesn't like you, not because the bike was bad, but because the world moved forward and regulations tightened and market priorities shifted. And as riders, we have 2 choices. We can either hold on to nostalgia and complain, or we can understand the forces shaping the industry and adapt while still appreciating the legends that defined previous eras. And those legends still live on in the used market, in track days, in collector garages, and in rider memories. And sometimes scarcity even increases their legendary status, making them more desirable than ever. So if you own one of these bikes, take care of it, because you're riding a piece of history. And if you're shopping for one, you may need to explore the pre-owned market instead of expecting a factory-fresh unit. And that's the reality of modern motorcycling in 2026. Regulations, economics, and consumer trends all shaping what dealers can and cannot sell. And while change is inevitable, passion for riding remains constant. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about which model sits on a showroom floor, it's about the connection between rider and machine, the freedom of two wheels, and the thrill of the open road. And if you found this breakdown helpful, make sure you like and subscribe to Motolap for more honest motorcycle discussions. And as always, safe ride, long life.